We have had some very dramatic moments in history where the mix of education, religion, and politics have created quite the firestorms. Recall when then PC Party leader John Tory tried to offer public funding to faith-based schools, or when former Premier Bill Davis extended public funding to the end of high school for Catholic schools. But they pale in comparison to the granddaddy of brouhahas, which ultimately resulted in a prime minister being forced from office. Ted Glenn is the author of A Very Canadian Coup, The Rise and Demise of Prime Minister Mackenzie Bole, 1894 to 1896. And Ted Glenn, who manages the graduate program in public administration at Humber College, joins us now with the gory details. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Steve.
Let's go back. We want to set the scene here. Johnny MacDonald is the Prime Minister, and he dies in office.
Yeah.
And there are a succession of relatively short-lived Prime Ministers who take over for him. John Abbott gets forced from office because of bad health. John Thompson dies in office at the age of 50. And along then comes Mackenzie Bole. Tell us about him. Who is he?
Well, he's the member from long-standing member from Belleville. He'd been in office since 1867. He was at that point, by 1894, the longest-serving cabinet minister. And he was a bit special because, a lot of people would say that he lacked guile. And he was humorous, he was funny, and he was authentic. And so he kind of stood out in the Ottawa crowd.
You want to bring that picture up, Sheldon? We'll show everybody what he looked like. Lady Aberdeen, the wife of the Governor General, described him as rather fussy and decidedly commonplace, and also an Orangeman. Accurate?
Accurate. He was, though, I think, I forget who said it, but he was kind of an old school Orangeman, even though he had been highly involved in the lodge activities and actually had been the Grand Poobah for a while. He was also recognized the rights of minorities, particularly Catholics, and in fact lost his first election because he was trying to protect the rights of a Catholic aid organization.
Which would have made him very unusual for an Orangeman.
Correct.
Okay. He found himself, as Prime Minister, neck deep in an issue that combined, as we said off the top, the toxic mix of education, politics, and religion. The Manitoba schools question. What was that?
Well, you got to go back in history. So when Manitoba joined Confederation, they had a constitutional recognition of their separate school system, their denominational school system, and that was set out in their the Manitoba Act 1870. At that point, the population was roughly half Protestant, half Catholic. By the time 1889 rolled around, that population had shifted dramatically with a lot of immigration, particularly from Ontario. And you have the population shifted so that there's 13% Roman Catholics. You've got 7% French-speaking. And so there was a movement. There was a movement across the country, a very anti-Catholic, anti-French movement. And the provincial government of Thomas Greenway tried to get rid of that denominational school system with a couple pieces of legislation in 1890. And that's what started the crisis, because then they took it to court and it made it all the way up to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, our highest court at the time.
Right. The Supreme Court was not the final word in Canada at this time. We could actually go to Great Britain to challenge laws, right?
Correct.
Okay. So it's because the Catholic and French numbers are declining in Manitoba that the Manitoba government figures we can just get rid of the Catholic system altogether.
And in those days, it was good politics.
Running against Catholics,
against
if you're majority
Catholics
Protestants. Okay, so all right, it goes to the courts here, it goes to the courts in Britain. Did that resolve it?
In the end, it didn't. It went up and down a couple of times. And what happened in January, so a month after Bole gets appointed Prime Minister, they had made, the previous Prime Minister, John Thompson, had made a referral to the court system, asking if, in fact, the Roman Catholic minority still held the right of an appeal. If their rights had been trampled on. The court came back and said, indeed, they did. And indeed, Parliament held jurisdiction to be able to pass remedial legislation if they were so inclined.
You pointed out that Bole was not a typical Orangeman in as much as he did care about minority rights. And let's just pluck a little clip from your book here. Here's Mackenzie Bole in A Very Canadian Coup, as quoted by Ted Glenn. Per se, he said, I am not in favor of separate schools. I believe Manitoba came into this Dominion with the distinct and positive promise incorporated in the Constitution of the province that they should have the right of separate schools retained to them forever in the same manner that they are enjoyed by the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. And as such, no matter what my individual opinion may be, as a public man, I consider myself bound, and I will take my party with me as far as I can to carry out to the fullest possible extent the promises that were made to the minority at Confederation. That is a pretty progressive view for a conservative Orangeman at the time. How well did that view go over in his conservative cabinet and caucus?
Well, the technology has probably advanced a bit, but much like a Led Zeppelin, it's
not well, in other words.
not well at all. No, he had the Ontario caucus was particularly anti-French, I would say, anti-Catholic. They had a core group of about 40 or so that did not want the federal government to be proposing this kind of legislation, and they didn't want it because they knew that they wouldn't get elected if they had to go to the polls on that particular issue.
And the hunch was an election was coming soon.
The hunch, well, they had to have one by 1896, and the reason why Mackenzie Bol got appointed is that he agreed with the Governor General that they should probably have an election in the spring of 1895. They'd already gone through 3 premiers. And the
3 prime ministers. You mean.
Yes, the terminology at the time still mixed, like
Yes.
in Ontario up until later. And so they all thought one was coming at any point, and so they did not feel confident that they'd get elected on that mandate.
So that election call is like a sword of Damocles hanging over the Conservative government's head at the time. Yep. And Bol is trying to figure out, how do I satisfy my backbench, while at the same time trying to figure out this whole Manitoba schools question. How well did he navigate those choppy waters?
Canada's to the left, Canada's to the right. He was in an incredibly difficult position, and I think when subsequent historians and political scientists look back at him, they think, he didn't do a good job of managing his caucus, managing his cabinet. I'm not sure many people would have done much better. You had this Ontario caucus if you pass this legislation and propose it, we're going to storm out. And then he had the similar thing happening with his Quebec ministers, that they were demanding that he introduce this remedial legislation immediately.
To help the Catholics in Manitoba.
Correct.
So between a rock and a hard place.
And then the third part is that Clifford Sifton, who was the brains behind the operation in Manitoba, he and Laurier had already made a secret agreement that whatever the federal government did, they weren't going to negotiate. They'll just wait till Laurier came into office. So yeah,
he being the Liberal leader at the time, Sir Wilfrid Laurier. Enter Charles Tupper. He's another big player in all of this. What was his role?
Well, he's the coup leader. He'd been around forever. He was a father of Confederation. He was a premier of Nova Scotia. He was a longtime senior cabinet minister that Macdonald had turned to on numerous occasions to help the party out in elections, passing important legislation related to the Canadian Pacific Railway, for example. He'd been for years saying, I don't want the job. I don't want the job. But finally, when it looked like the Conservative brand was tarnished and they weren't going to be able to win an election, some of the senior party officials went to him and said, look, you got to come back, because this Bol fella's, we're not going to win with him. So he came back and facilitated a transition, shall we say.
Oh, that's a nice way to put it. In fact, what happened, if I read your book properly, was Bol and Tupper have a meeting. At which time, would you say Tupper put an ultimatum to him, or how would you describe it?
Well, actually, he didn't put it to him. The meeting was 5 o'clock in the East Block on a Saturday, January 3rd, 1896, I believe. The two had been in talking about next steps, possibly Tupper taking over, possibly maybe Bol becoming the High Commissioner in Great Britain, maybe Lieutenant Governor. And 2 hours into the meeting, the private secretary of the finance minister, George Foster, shows up with a manila envelope. Tupper opens it, and there's a letter of resignation from 7 of his ministers because they didn't have confidence in his ability to lead the party in the next election.
Bol eventually agrees to step down. And on his way, I guess, out of Parliament that day, he runs into a reporter with the Toronto Globe who asked him, "What went on today, Mackenzie Bol?" And Mackenzie Bol responded, "You may say that it is the blackest piece of political treachery on record." At one point, near the end of an impromptu party, one of the Liberals asked Bol how well he felt. Bol replied, loud enough to be heard in the press gallery above, "Very well, considering that I have been living in a nest of traitors." Do we infer from that he wasn't thrilled with the way things turned out?
He was not thrilled at all, and in fact, he didn't speak to three of the key cabinet ministers in it for the rest of his life. But at the end of the day, he also recognized, he was also a good Conservative Party man, and at the end of the day recognized that perhaps he wasn't the one to lead in the next election, and he ultimately made the decision to step down and hand the reins over to Tupper.
And when Tupper became prime minister, all those cabinet ministers that had quit in protest came back?
All of them came back, except for his son, Charlie, because only one Tupper in cabinet was enough for everybody at that time.
Gotcha. The election is called. Tupper then gets sworn in as prime minister,
Yep.
May 1st, 1896. The election campaign is on, and what happens?
So he spends, Tupper is the prime minister with the shortest record on record, spends basically 2 months on the hustings. He doesn't, I think there's 2 cabinet meetings in that point, and so it's just a very, very transitional government. And then Laurier, Sir Wilfrid Laurier and the Liberal Party basically mop the Conservatives up, and there's a landslide victory, particularly in Quebec, and one of the most important turning points in Canadian election history in 1896. And then Tupper goes on to become the leader of the opposition for the next 2 parliaments.
So he is the shortest serving prime minister in Canadian history.
Correct.
So what do you want to conclude about how smart it was for him to try to throw the previous guy out?
I don't think he I don't think anybody fully appreciated how popular, how important, and how well organized the Liberal Party was.
Under Laurier.
Under Laurier. And that, at the end of the day, was, even a number of senior Conservative officials recognized that they just got beat because they just weren't ready.
Tupper is the shortest serving prime minister ever. Laurier is the longest serving member of parliament ever. They really are on opposite ends of this thing, aren't they?
They are indeed.
How did Mackenzie Bole feel about the outcome? His Conservative Party lost, but
He recognized. He wrote a letter to Tupper shortly after, and he recognized that for probably one of the first times in Canadian history, you have ethnicity and religion becoming a more important factor in electoral results than party politics.
you got to figure, though, that the word Schadenfreude was made for a moment like this, right? They forced Bole out. He's on the sidelines. In fact, I think, what'd you say, went to the UK during the election? Just to be away from it all?
Yep.
Tupper loses, gets his hat handed to him. I mean, Bole's got to be kind of, I told you so about all this, isn't he?
He's also a great party man. He comes back to Canada and pretty soon after becomes leader of the government in the Conservatives. It's not the government, the Conservatives in the Senate, and does that job for another decade and a half.
And he dies just short of 94 years old.
Yep.
So he had a good long life.
Good long life. Nobody from Ottawa showed up to the funeral, but...
Isn't that something? Nobody from the Federal Party showed up to his funeral.
No.
And where's he buried?
He's buried in Belleville.
In Belleville,
hometown,
Ontario.
yep.
Okay. So anybody, go check him out. He's in Belleville, Ontario. Have you been to the cemetery? Have you seen it?
I haven't been to the cemetery, no.
Has he got a nice headstone?
It's relatively small. I've seen pictures. I believe it's a national monument observed.
Okay. Let's circle back now to the education question. So there's now a federal government that's liberal. There's a provincial government in Manitoba that's liberal. Presumably, the two of them could figure all this out to everybody's satisfaction. Did they?
The so-called Laurier-Greenway Compromise, November 1896. So one of the first things Laurier does when he gets back into office. And the compromise really was a compromise. I mean, it was what ended up happening is that they didn't reestablish a separate school board as the Catholics had maintained they wanted. They basically allowed some Roman Catholic and French language education after school hours. Where numbers warranted, say 40 within a school district, they had to hire a Roman Catholic or French-speaking teacher. And so it was nowhere near what the Conservatives were trying to reestablish, but it was enough to get the federal government off the hook and not have to impose the remedial legislation.
But would you say that because Catholics did not get the school board, they did not get Catholic schools, which the Constitution guaranteed them, do you think Catholics in Manitoba essentially got screwed at the end of the day?
Well, and they did, I think. And I think one of the interesting things about that 1896 election is that even though there was a Liberal landslide in Quebec, the voters in Manitoba overwhelmingly voted in Conservatives.
Huh. Okay, let's finish up on this. I mean, we gave a couple of examples off the top. Those are certainly not, it's not an exhaustive list of moments in our history where you get this mix of politics, education, and religion that ends up torpedoing anybody who, I mean, it's a third rail in some respects. Anybody who touches it gets killed. Why?
It's a really good question. I think the lesson from this particular episode is that I think politicians get absolutely skittish when those two things cross, and because there's absolutely no way of controlling it, of forecasting it, of figuring out. I mean, who would have thought that a Liberal government under Laurier would be able to sell a compromise that was far less than what the Conservatives had proposed in their remedial legislation? But they continued to vote in Laurier for a long time after that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the uncertainty and the inability to forecast and control the outcome on that issue.
Let me really put you on the spot here, okay? Here we are 125 years roughly after the events that you've written about. And there are still lots of people here in the province of Ontario today, 155 and a half years after Confederation, mm-hmm. who think we have no business having a Catholic school system in this province because it favors one religion to the exclusion of all else. Never mind the bargain that was made at Confederation. They say it's inconsistent with a modern, multicultural, progressive province today.
Correct.
What should we take today from the example that was set 125 years ago?
Well, I think your analogy is pretty bang on. I think it's a third rail, and I think that anybody who's going to propose to touch it, as John Tory proposed, expanding the idea of
faith-based funding,
is going to get shocked.
So no one should touch it.
From a political point of view, in terms of electoral politics and winnability, no.
I think many Catholic property taxpayers would probably be glad to hear that. There we go. Ted, we're glad you came in today. We're glad you wrote A Very Canadian Coup, The Rise and Demise of Prime Minister Mackenzie Bull, 1894 to 1896. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.